Hello, and welcome to the Sunshine Study. I'm Dr. Rebecca, the Lifejoy coach and author, and I am delighted to be with you. Thank you for having me. I thought I'd talk a little bit about how my Lifejoy work came about. It wasn't anything I knew I would do. I didn't think about it from childhood. It evolved with my life, and I wanted to make a loving purpose from the experiences I had had. So this is really how it started. I was the only child of only children, and I'm born in the northeast of England. I was very fortunate. I've been very loved, very supportive, but illness has chased my family to a degree that has been extreme and protracted. And there are great lessons from that immense difficulty, which I share in all of my work now. But really, I want to cherish life. I want to be super resilient, and I want to help my clients and readers be that too. So where did it start really? Well, there'd been adult illness in my family when I was a little child, so I understood hospitals, I understood consultants, I understood bedridden, I understood loss. So there were some early signs of experience there, but really that was not out of the ordinary. It was probably more than most people, but it still wasn't good. But at 17, I had worked very hard. I'd been very fit. I'd been very strong. I'd been athletic. I'd been, a diligent child, well behaved, all of the good things, but I got glandular fever. And like many people with ME, glandular fever then just ruined me. And part of that was that I had pushed in those early stages of illness to go back to school too early. I can tell you the date I did it, which was Monday the 15th of November, and I was ruined. And it's very dramatic to say you were ruined, but I really was. And within a space of a few weeks from that early time in 1991, I was bedbound. I could barely take myself to the shower. I was tortured with pain. I had lots of ME symptoms. It was grim. And I had been looking forward to going to university. And it was a great loss to see all of that slipping away. I'd worked hard and wanted very good A-level grades. The chances of that now doing 3 A-levels and going away were getting further and further from me. So I had several months very, very sick at home. I then managed to drag myself back to school for one lesson on Valentine's Day in 1992. And I went in a taxi. I lay down in the taxi. I then went for a chat with one of my teachers to see how we could make progress. And in the end, we decided that I would try and do 1 A-level and I would do 2 hours a week of school, and that I'd probably either have to go in a taxi, be taken, and then I really spent the rest of the week in bed or recovering. And it was very brutal. Now, the interesting thing is if I saw somebody in that state, I'd just say complete rest, be careful, follow joy where you can, manage your energy, pace, all of those things. But the drive in me was so insatiable, and that's still in me. So in many respects, it caused many of these problems, but it's also saved me and made me. So there's an interesting duality going on there. So I did that 1 A-level with great difficulty, with wonderful friends, wonderful school. I hardly managed it, but I did manage it. And there were moments in those very difficult early weeks and months where I went to do an exam, for example, and people were being very kind to me. And I remember I walked in the gym where all the tables were, and I just slumped in the first exam desk I could find, propped myself up against the wall, ready to go. And the wonderful teacher at the front said, "Oh, no, come to the front, Becca. I've saved a desk for you so you can be close to the staff in case you need anything." And I remember the walk from the desk to the front was more than I could manage. And I was grappling between desks. And then suddenly, and this is a great miracle of my life that keeps happening, is a little pair of arms came underneath me and helped me get to that seat. And I remember that was a young lad in my class who was just a delight. So I managed to do that first A-level. And apparently, I still had no diagnosis, I had no treatment, I had very little help from the medical profession, but, there was a general consensus that if you have a summer of rest, it'll all be all right. We'll go back to school, do the other 2 A-levels, go away to university, all shall be well. Well, that didn't happen. I went back to school for a few weeks. I did the 2 sets of lessons, which were far too much for me. And then after Christmas, I crashed again, didn't go back to school, did 1 A-level on revision time on my own, a couple of hours, maybe a week, 2 or 3 little sessions a day of 10 minutes, and then did that final A-level. Now, what that time taught me, and this was really mighty, was that you can still have horrendous things happen to you. You can lose it all, but you can still be you. And there can be great lessons from that. And one of the great lessons was I learned to work on my own very, very effectively and efficiently with very little energy. And in many ways, that was my Lifejoy philosophy, starting because I learned how to work under great duress with few resources and still try and have a little bit of happiness. I had lovely friends. I was very blessed. They'd send me letters, old-fashioned big video cassettes, visit for short periods of time, try really hard, but I was a very, very sick person. So where does that then take us? How does that get us to Lifejoy? Well, then I decided I would try and go to university locally because going away was impossible. And at the time, all my friends were sort of getting 3 A's and going off and doing wonderful things, going travelling, and I was still in that bedroom. So the world was lapping me, and that's a really interesting concept when you're this young. But the thing that held on to my sanity and to the health, the minute health that I still had, was that, thank God, I was 17. This hadn't happened when I was 7 or 10 or 11. I'd had a lot of normal life. I'd had school trips, I'd had the brass band, I'd had church, I'd had choir, I'd had wonderful pals, I'd had parents and holidays and caravans. So I can reel these blessings off because I've thought about them a great deal and done my very best to treasure them, save them, and love every school trip I went on. So I would go to university locally, which meant Durham, Sunderland, Newcastle or Teesside, essentially. And the only one that I could manage was Sunderland because you could park right on the door and most of the lectures had really good access. And when your walking is very, very limited, I didn't have an electric wheelchair, I didn't really have any support in that sense, that would do it. And I met a wonderful special needs officer, that was the name then, who made me believe a degree was possible. She made me believe I was worth trying. So that remarkable angelic force in my life helped me, and what it meant was I just started. And of course, the story roller coaster of my life that it is, boom, 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 boom. I did 3 weeks of a degree, crashed again, and then spent the rest of that year in and out of hospital, very, very sick. And, you know, it was, why are you bothering? And I had kind lecturers, but they were, Rebecca, this is, you know, you're ruining yourself even more. But there was just something in me, that little bit of Lifejoy that wanted to try. So one of my textbooks was in my hospital with me. Somehow I managed to sneak it in my book. And I just had that textbook at the end of my bed on that table. And I don't think I ever used it, but it was there. It was a geography textbook. So I did one geography module that whole year. When everybody else was doing 6 modules, I did this one. Again, I taught myself and I did that exam in the summer and I passed. So suddenly it was this tiny bit of success in this great bleak world. So the following year, I did 1 module in 1 term, while everybody else is doing 3. I just managed it. And I had friends who would sort of carry my bag for me. The lecturer let me have extra time for the essays, but it was a lifeline. And the world was telling me, just do an OU degree, just pack in, don't bother. But I just couldn't. I had to have that lifeline of it. I was a student. I was something other than an ill person. The following term, I managed to do, drum roll, 2 modules in a term, and I felt like I was flying. But, you know, these early years of that degree meant that I was still having about 30 or 40 weeks a year bedbound or housebound. Infections were getting me all the time, and, you know, a simple cold would cost me 2.5, 3 weeks in bed with a massive flare-up. So even when I was at my best, I was still very restricted and very ill. And then these things would come and completely clatter the 10% of energy that I had. But, you know, I was slow and steady. I was an absolute snail's pace. But after several years, and some years I did 1 module a term, sometimes I did 2, sometimes I did 4 in a year, that built year after year after year. And suddenly I'm at the end of a degree and I'm nearly there. And all of the naysayers were not saying those things anymore. And all of those Lifejoy strategies had purpose because they were teaching me to be super resilient, super resourceful, super pleased with tiny treasures of life. And yet I was still hopeful, but still very battered. So by the end of that degree, I had cottoned on to the fact you could have extra time in exams and you could have exam conditions help you. And one of the things that I knew I could do was I could speak my learning and my work reasonably well. So by the grace of God, they gave me an oral exam. And I got pushed into that oral exam in a wheelchair, and the examiners and the teachers sat there and asked me the questions. And I remember the wheelchair had very big arms, and thank God they were cushioned, so they kind of held me up for that time. And by the end of that degree, here's an amazing thing. I won a prize, and I won a prize for overall academic achievement. And that wasn't because I was clever, it was because I had the Lifejoy skills to do it. And that Lifejoy skills aren't just about academic success, they're about coping with difficulty, keeping your own worth, but still making progress, however slow that is. So, end of that first degree, the things that I suddenly realised was that I had transferable skills. And the university began to see that, great blessing, and offered me a master's degree. Did the master's degree part-time, which sounds really easy, but it wasn't, because I was still 20, 30 weeks a year bed, housebound, very poorly, infections all the time, big allergic reactions. It was unpleasant, but I also could count my blessings. And it was in those years that I started to write a gratitude journal, and I've done that ever since. I have mountains of notebooks. And in this time, the university asked me to give talks to their new students about how to keep going through the difficult times. And the first talk that I stood up and did, I knew I was home. This was what I had to do. We had to use the difficulty of all of this to some good purpose. And a lot of those students had partied hard. A lot of those students had lived a big life. And I was sort of crawling in, trying to prop myself up and cope. But I wanted it so much. If you've ever seen the film Educating Rita, her zest for learning and life and independence, oh my goodness, I empathise with that so much. So suddenly I'm able to stand up, talk, teach people resilience tactics, and I had a talk that I called the God Talk, or the Dog Talk, which was, an alliteration of gratitude, organisation and determined discipline, or the other way around depending if you were an atheist. That talk went down a storm. University then offered me a doctorate, which sounds really simple, doesn't it? But I cast myself around to all kinds of different academic institutions, still unwell, still not able to do any of them because I wasn't well enough to go to them. But in the end, I kind of grappled together, scrabbled and raggy, old baggy me, this doctorate proposal. I found a tutor in Sunderland, so I stayed the whole time of my academic career in that one institution because they looked after me well. That's what it comes down to. They protected me, they provided equal opportunities, extra opportunities, but also I could contribute back, and that was really very, very profound. At the end of that doctorate, and I often tell people I did everything right and it all went horribly wrong in lots of stages in my life. My tutor left, so I was on my own, and I had to do what's called a viva, which is the end of an academic pursuit exam where you have to have a panel in front of you and they ask you questions about your thesis. Now, I will show you in future what my thesis was. It was this thick, and I was a historian. I had revised it well, I had learnt it well, and I was well practiced. And in the end, I had to do an extra 9-10 months of work to change this after a lifetime. I was well into my 30s by this point of illness, but trying to hang on and be qualified for something. And in the end, I got that doctorate. And in the end, I had a prize-winning degree, a distinction at master's level, and a doctorate. And I was unemployable. And that's a dreadful feeling. It really is. And told by multiple immunologists and consultants, you won't work, you're not going to get better, you're deluded was quite a funny word, but you won't be able to put this right. Your health has been ruined for so long, this will not improve. So what, you've got it down from 40 weeks a year to 20. You're still ill 20 weeks of the year and the rest of the time really worn out. But that was a very significant improvement. When you've had 20 weeks a year less in bed, oh my goodness, that just gives you some more life. So I suddenly thought, well, could we get that down to 10? If I were only ill for 10 weeks a year, or that's the average of infections or treatments or whatever it was, what else could I do with that minute amount of energy? So I was asking questions all the time. What if it were possible? What could we do with what we have? How can we make it better? What am I doing that I know I shouldn't do that isn't helping me? These are what I call Lifejoy quality questions. They were emanating from all of this adversity. So then finally, by the end of that doctorate, I could do 3 things. I could write reasonably well, I could speak in public, and I wanted to leave my audience a bit inspired. Now, a lot of academic life is not inspiring. It's, hard slog, research, it's chasing funding, it's a brutal world. But I loved it when I saw an audience just go out a little bit straighter, a bit smiler, a bit stronger, a bit more smiley. You know, the heads were held high. And I thought, I wonder if I can do this in some way as work. Because I think work is where your talents meets the world's needs. Work is love made visible. How could I use all of this knowledge to some good purpose? So then, what did I do? Well, then a great boulder hit us again, and I had very brave but very unwell parents, and my mum was given a terminal diagnosis of degenerative illness. So I spent that first year really helping her, and then she had 13 years of excruciating decline. So that was a very dominant part. Even though my health had improved somewhat, my management skills were very good, this was an absolutely devastating blow. So somehow I had to make something of what I had. And I was very blessed by then to have a wonderful husband, and somehow we would cobble this together. But I wanted to contribute in some way. Now, the interesting thing is you hear the phrase, adversity is the mother of invention. So one day I sat in our only new piece of furniture, which was an IKEA chair, and had a post-it note and made a list of all the things that I could do to try and earn us some extra income to just help us. And on that list, Lifejoy was born. And I wrote lots of things like make cakes, rent out the garage, sell things, pet sit, although I was so ill, I could never have done pet sitting. But, I absolutely downloaded the thoughts. I listened to lots of people giving advice, and I suddenly thought, what if I could be self-employed? What if? Because I was so ill, I knew I couldn't be a lecturer, but I could do lectures. I was too ill to have a book contract, but I knew I could write. But I knew I had hardcore experience that was important. So over the next few years, I really honed down and became self-employed, and the first money I ever earned was £20. My first goal was to earn £20 in a month. It was a tiny goal, like that first degree, everybody laughed at me. Then it was £20 a week. Then was it £100 in a month? And when I earned that first money, I cannot tell you what that felt like. My first cheque was £30, and I kept it on the desk for 2 months until I realised it needed cashing because it would go out of date. So the reality is, we have had so much illness hit us, and there have been huge lessons from it. So therefore, all of the books that I write now, the one-to-one coaching and life counselling that I offer, the courses that I offer, and this work even now, the blogs, the posts, are all the fruit and the harvest of that suffering and struggle. That doesn't negate it, but it does do something with it. And every time I have a client send me a photograph of something they've managed or achieved or overcome, or they've passed something that they couldn't manage before, it fills my soul, but it also knocks out a wall of enormous grief. So within this last 15 years of being self-employed, I've done several things, but mainly I've just tried to write, speak, and think wisely and help other people do the same. So within that confabulation of it all, I worked as a Christian celebrant. So I've always had life coaching clients, I've always written things, but I took services because a weird variety of circumstances happened, but somebody I really loved died, and I wrote a eulogy for them because I wanted them to be magnified, glorified, all of their goodness shown. And I put it in the church magazine just as a tribute to them. And somebody rang me up and said, you know exactly how we feel, you know how to say it, you've got to do more of this. And under a set of circumstances, I ended up with qualifications as a Christian celebrant, which then led over 10 years, and I've taken nearly 1,000 loving funeral services. So that is a real stretching. I've had huge amounts of illness personally. I've had tragic and difficult parental illness. I've had immense adversity in other areas, and I've taken 1,000 funeral services. And once that does, and what that shows you is just how much people love each other, how much they can endure, and also that, how valuable life is, how precious everything is, and that 1,000 people would always swap with you wherever you are. So that's a little bit about me. I've still lost all those abilities to run, climb, be in the brass band, go in a canoe, run up a mountain, go to parties, do big things. I have a much smaller life now, but I'm immensely grateful for the energy and the health that I do have. And I've also had resources to be able to go and try different treatments. And I can honestly say that I have just about tried every possible thing to be well, protect my health, value the unity of the relationships that I have, and to make the most of what I have. So it's about what you can do with a little bit that's in your hand is far more valuable than you ever realise. Remembering your own goodness, your own worth, and your own ability to contribute is something that I work with clients every day. So that's a little bit about me, my backstory. I know what struggle is. I know what great suffering is. And I've got a ton of qualifications, so I have a lot of education. I've had a ton of empathy because I've had a ton of struggle and suffering. And I have a ton of experience because of all the life that I've had. And that's why it's useful. So I told you earlier that Lifejoy was love, integrity, fortitude, energy, joy, order and you. And I look at those things all the time. So I've got a lovely list of videos to share with you, which I hope will enrich you, make you wiser, bolder, stronger, and a bit more joyous. And I'm currently in the sunshine study. My previous video was the other way around. I hope you love the yellow, the sunflowers. They are tall, they are golden, and they seek the light. And when the storms come, they hold one another together. I hope that happens for you today, my friend. So thank you for having me. Take care, God bless, be safe, and I'll see you next time. If you'd like to like and subscribe, that would be utterly joyous. Take care and God bless, my friends.